Deputy Adams. Deputy Adams, please. Resume your seat. If we have time, I'll let you back in again. Thank you. Deputy Adams, thank you. Thank you.
Well, first of all, Concordia, can I thank the Taoiseach for clarifying his remarks about my whereabouts. I'm not in the States. I'm here, and I'm reassured that the Taoiseach recognises that. However, he did accuse me of being disrespectful to the Dáil by going to the States, and I note he didn't withdraw that accusation. However, to more serious matters, and most of my remarks are about the whole issue of refugees, and I repeat, as we often have here, the difficulty of dealing with so many questions over such a range of time and such a range of subjects. But I think if you just think about the work that's been done by the LE Samuel Beckett, by the crews of that vessel and of the LE Etna and the LE Neve, that they've rescued 8,000 people. You know, that's the size of a town, a huge amount of people. And if you consider that this year there have been at least 3,350 confirmed fatalities this year, and that surpasses the death toll for all of 2014. And deaths off the Greek islands have surged with the cold weather, setting in. And we've seen almost 500 men, women and children dying in the last 3.5 weeks. And the problem is we become fatigued, we become numb to this. You know, we just hear it out of the corner of our ear that 6 children were drowned, or that a number of adults were drowned. And then you yourself spoke in your remarks about the size of the flight from Syria, millions of people in conditions, really, really horrendous conditions, in refugee camps. Now, I noted that you acknowledged that there was a drop of public confidence in the EU institutions, and I think that's important that that is acknowledged. But then you went on to say that partially the success of those institutions accounts for the reason why these people are fleeing. But these people are fleeing because of war and poverty. I'm sure they'll tell you, as the Irish will tell you, they'd rather be home. And those who I've heard in interviews have said that. So in the last 2 months, 250,000 human beings, one of the greatest mass movements of population in modern history in the European continent, have made their way on foot through the Balkans and into Central Europe. And I did meet with Prime Minister Alex Tsipras in September, and he told me of the significant difficulties his government has in facing up to the challenge with the number of refugees that are arriving there. So just a question. First of all, my commendation to the naval services. Have you discussed extending this very, very worthwhile humanitarian mission beyond December, when it's due to end? And secondly, and I raised this at the time, have the issue of allowances for the naval personnel, has that issue been resolved by the government? Now, if we then go to this notion of decreasing confidence, the Slovenian Prime Minister warned that the EU risks falling apart. The High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy said the European Union risks disintegrating if it fails to produce a comprehensive programme. And on that very day that she gave that warning, Austria announced its plans to build a fence in an effort to stop the flow of refugees, and did not inform the European Commission before their decision. So there have been rising tensions over many of these matters and over how individual states have responded to it. There was a big issue made of the decision to increase cooperation with what are referred to as third countries, and in this case Turkey. And an action plan with Turkey was agreed which seeks to provide financial support for the Turkish government in its efforts to cope with the 2 million refugees from Syria that are in camps along the border. And that's to stop people from making the journey to Europe. And in return, EU leaders agreed to discuss visa-free travel for Turkish citizens and to resume negotiations over Turkey's EU membership bid. But Taoiseach, all of this ignores Turkey's deplorable human rights record, especially against the Kurds, Turkey's own role in the Syrian conflict, its illegal occupation of northern Cyprus, and the recent decision of the Turkish government to go on a military offensive against the Kurdistan Workers' Party. So, you know, all of these issues have to be judged in the round. And we see in Turkey widespread attacks on journalists. We see dozens of Kurdish media outlets being gagged. We see, instead of building the peace, and there was some progress being made up until recently, that the Turkish government has put narrow political concerns first. So I just would ask you to reflect on this carrot that's been offered to the government of Turkey and the stick that's been offered to the refugees, and it strikes me this is not a morally sustainable position. And there are some media sources claiming that the agreement is stalled. So can the Taoiseach shed any light on this? I want to return, and I'm pleased that you mentioned the question of the deteriorating situation in Palestine, and the death toll in that region is rising. Israel is continuing to seal off neighbourhoods in occupied East Jerusalem. And when I was there recently, the local people showed me where this was going to develop in the future. And they were right. We can now see it. I looked at a map on television the other evening, and you can now see that Palestinian people are being both evicted and then being denied the right to travel in areas which are being put under Israeli control. And there is definitively a shoot-to-kill policy by the Israeli Defence Forces. 61 Palestinians killed by these forces. 10 Israelis have been killed by Palestinians, mostly in stabbings. And the Palestinian Authority appears to be on the verge of collapse. And again, when I was there, some of the older people, long-standing community activists, said that the younger people weren't listening to them anymore. And again, I think, unfortunately, that has come to pass also. Now, this Dáil passed a motion of support for the recognition of the Palestinian state, and the government has failed to act on this. And I think if the government acted on this, that it would be a very, very, very clear signal that we support, on a basis of equality, the rights of the people of Israel and the rights of the people of Palestine. And I would ask you, Taoiseach, to commit today to doing that.
Taoiseach.
Thank you, Deputy Adams. I didn't wish to infer that you were in any way disrespectful to the Dáil. I think we can all agree, Corla, with the response of the naval personnel on the 3 naval vessels that have been down in the Mediterranean that are still there, with over 8,000 rescued. I've listened to the accounts of some of the naval personnel who rescued people, men, women and children, and I think for them it's been an extraordinary emotional engagement, considering what's happened to these people. When you hear you hear the High Representative indicate that the trafficking of people in inferior boats for which they're charged just means, in many cases, certain death. Would you overload a small rib in Dún Laoghaire and say you're going to go to Holyhead in any kind of weather? You wouldn't do it. And what happens in many cases is that when a large boat appears, the smaller rib may be destroyed deliberately so that people end up in the water, either drowned or saved. And it's going on between Turkey and the proximity of the Grecian islands on a regular basis. So when you see the pictures of the flow of people who are in many cases middle-class people, well-educated, engineers, and so on, coming from Syria, mixed now, I have to say, with economic migrants from some of the Balkan countries, wishing to make their way to Austria and Germany and Sweden. This has placed an unprecedented strain on the capacity of many small countries to process them and deal with them as one would expect. Deputy Adams has raised the question of lack of confidence in the institutions on the one hand, and because of confidence in the institutions on the other, that people wish to come to Europe in the first place. The latter is true in the sense that the perception and the image of Europe as being a place of order and prosperity and opportunity has meant that in the case of civil war or conflict or destruction, that people wish to leave. You consider the extent of the numbers that have moved from Syria in an Irish context where a couple of million people would just up and leave. It's extraordinary. If you try to imagine in a family sense what that means, when you see them carrying their children and babies and buggies and elderly people, the overwhelming weight of numbers has meant that smaller countries have been unable to process these in an acceptable way, and that's why it's taken the Union quite a while to catch up. So while the image of Europe as a place of work and opportunity and prosperity, the success of that has been undermined, if you like, by the inability of Europe to deal with the numbers that have turned up. So either, Ceann Comhairle, you have the principle of freedom of movement within the European Union, or you don't. So if you have freedom of movement within the countries, then you have to protect your external borders. And that hasn't happened in the past. It meant that there are so many opportunities for people to enter the European Union by various routes. So as the principle of free movement is fundamental to the treaties, the question now dealing with Frontex and external borders was taken to the limit by Hungary, which put up a serious fence there. And obviously there are pressures on from other countries further east where economic migrants may mix with numbers coming from Syria who are asylum or refugee seekers, and this is causing great problems. But I have to say that the last couple of meetings of the Union, Ceann Comhairle, have genuinely tried to focus on what needs to be done here. And they're making progress, but obviously with the winter coming, a serious cold, snow, poor weather in Eastern Europe, to which many people from Syria and North African countries would never have experienced, there is a great urgency to provide accommodation and suitable accommodation for people. Ireland has taken the view, Ceann Comhairle, that while we're not part of the protocol, we wanted to be to play our part here in a compassionate and practical way, as well as seeking to deal with the root causes of all of this, which in this case is the war in Syria. We've made an important contribution on a number of fronts. The government agreed that we would accept in Ireland here approximately 4,000 asylum seekers and refugees under the resettlement and the relocation programme. That is well in excess of any sort of notional quota that might be allocated by the European Commission. And that includes, Cancórla, 520 refugees which we have offered to resettle from existing refugee camps in Greece and in Italy. Some of these have now started to arrive in Ireland. They've already been assessed. The implementation of the decisions to relocate 600 people from Italy and Greece under the initial Commission proposal and a further approximately 2,200 under the subsequent Commission proposal is work that's in train. Ireland is on course to take an initial tranche of 20 asylum seekers from Italy or Greece before Christmas. Initially, persons coming to Ireland on relocation will be from Syria and from Eritrea. The remaining approximately 680 people will be taken on resettlement or on relocation, with the final breakdown between those two to be yet decided. As I said, we've dealt with the question of the Ethna, the Niamh, and now the Samuel Beckett. 8,066 persons saved, rescued as of the 28th of October. I don't want to comment on the question that's been raised by PD Fora. This is a matter that is the subject of arbitration, and his work that is underway in that regard at Cancórla. We've also provided from the Irish taxpayer financial supports to areas that are badly affected by instability and conflict and war. 41 million will have been provided by the end of 2015 towards assisting those displaced as a result of the Syrian crisis, including through regional development and protection programme in the Middle East. 36 million has gone on humanitarian funding in Somalia since 2008, and furthermore, we recently committed to doubling our annual contribution to the World Food Programme from 10 million to 20 million per annum for the next 3 years. All of those have been supported by, a swift response from the government here. The announcement on the 10th of September of the Irish Refugee Protection Programme, and particularly the efforts of the Interdepartmental Task Force chaired by the Department of Justice, are important steps in the government's contribution. So the Red Cross is working closely at Cancórla with the government on this programme and is accepting offers of accommodation and other services through its website. Early in 2016, it's proposed to establish a series of emergency reception and orientation centres which will allow Ireland to receive approximately 100 migrants a month. On top of this, it's worth noting that the numbers applying for protection in the ordinary way through the normal channels has also increased substantially at Cancórla. That figure has grown from just under 1,000 in 2013 and is estimated to be 3,600 in 2015. Now, what more can we do? We've consistently demonstrated a strong commitment to solidarity within the EU and externally. As we've said already, we offer to take 4,000 refugees and asylum seekers, and we're advancing plans in that. The scale and the complexity means that it can't be addressed as quickly as one would have liked by the member states. I would say that Ireland is one of the world's most generous donors of humanitarian aid on a per capita basis, and we've not been found wanting in respect of this particular situation here. I would say that there are 2 million people in Turkey. 2 million people in Turkey at Cancórla, and I suppose, if you like, the political bargaining here was that there would be an assessment of the opening of some pre-accession chapters for Turkey, and 3 billion, a request of 3 billion in financial assistance from Turkey to the European Union, where most of the people who are there would wish to go back to Syria if the situation can be dealt with. Perhaps there are other questions there.
Deputy Boyle Barrett in.
Yeah, I'll deal with Palestine for you in a minute, Jerry. Yeah.